So one of the important questions and relevant questions that people are asking is whether this expansion in access to education that we've seen over the last 10 or 20 years in African countries has led to a deterioration in the quality of schooling. That's a very important question, and it affects education planning. And there is definitely a perception that the quality has actually deteriorated in response to this massive expansion in education. The problem is that the analysis is difficult to do when you only have measures of access or quality in isolation from each other. So let me explain. The case of Mozambique, for example, is interesting. Since 2000, there was a huge expansion in enrollment in primary school in Mozambique. At the same time, between 2000 and 2007, on the same standardized assessments in the SACMEC program, the average test score of Mozambique declined quite substantially. And so people maybe concluded that, well, look, over the period there was this massive expansion and the country's average test score went down, therefore there's a trade-off in that country at least between access to education and the quality of education provided. Now the problem with that is that it may not necessarily have been the case that the quality of learning went down. It may just be that there were a whole lot more poor students in the school system, and we know that poverty is a strong predictor of performance on tests. So it may be that now that you've got a whole lot more poor children in the system, that brings down the average, even if those who were previously enrolled maybe are doing just as well, if not better. And so our analysis, which provides a measure which is the proportion of all children in the population, not just those enrolled in school, the proportion of all children in the population that reach functional literacy or functional numeracy. And we find that according to that measure, that the overall proportion of children in Mozambique who reached functional literacy and numeracy actually increased over the period.
So while the focus of our study was Southern and East Africa with these 10 countries, this method and the rationale for doing this research is as applicable in places like Latin America, Southeast Asia, in North Africa. Wherever access is not universal, we need to be combining access and quality in ways that depict the real situation on the ground in that country.
Our argument is basically that there doesn't seem to have been a trade-off between access and quality, that actually in pretty much all these countries that we look at which expanded access over the last 10 years, pretty much all those countries experienced an improvement in the proportions of the population achieving functional literacy and numeracy, even if in some cases the average country test score declined somewhat. So that's an important way in which our measure helps answer a very important question that faces policymakers and an important challenge to the drive to expand schooling. So what we're basically saying is expansion is good. It's important to expand schooling. We shouldn't be reluctant to do so, but we're also saying that quality needs to be strongly addressed. And also as access to secondary school education perhaps becomes more the priority, I think you'll find that the quality of primary school education is going to be a binding constraint to furthering access to secondary education. So unless we get quality education in primary schools, we're unlikely to see meaningful access to secondary education in the next 10 or 20 years.